Hi and welcome. This is Jennifer. So glad you're here as always. Today I have a really fun technique for you that I haven't done in a very long time. And this is a 4-for-1 technique. So what happens is you create it one time and you end up with 4 cards. I have 3 batches of cards to show you, so that's 12 cards in total. And I'm really hoping that you'll give this technique a try. It really is worth it. It works with any large stamp or stencil image. Today I'll be using layering stencils. Let's get started with our first batch of cards. I'll be using layering stencils from Gina K Designs. She has many different stencils and large floral stamps that would work for this technique. I'm starting with these spectacular sunflower stencils, very easy to layer, and then the final stencil has circle patterns so you can change up the pattern at the center of the flower, or you could use those circle images separately. I am taking a piece of 8.5 by 11 white cardstock and I will cut it down the center in both directions. So first here I'm cutting at 5.5 and then I will cut at 4.25. So we'll end up with 4 pieces that are A2 size, 4.25 by 5.5 inches. You could do any really sizes you want, just as long as you have 4 that are the same size. I'm using some temporary tape to tape together the top 2 pieces, and so I have them just butt up against each other and put tape to connect them, and I'll do the same with the other 2 pieces. Any kind of temporary tape will work here. I'll reuse this piece a few times. Then I will put them up against each other, the top and the bottom, and tape that together. So basically we're taping this together how it was before we cut it apart, and you'll see why in a bit. So this is the front, this is the side we'll do the inking on. I'm starting with the first of the layering stencils from the sunflower, and I'm lining it up so that the tips of those petals on the left, right, top, and bottom line up with the cuts in our paper. Very easy to do. This is a symmetrical image, so you can see the cuts in the paper go right down the center and right down the sides of the flowers. So let's start with medium Carnation ink from Gina K Designs. This is a beautiful pink with a little peach feel to it, and I'm using a large blending brush. I'm doing this entire image with one color, and it's a big one, so I save time by using a bigger blending tool. However, use whatever you have. You can use any kind of blending tool that you want. You can use any type of ink here that you want. I'm using some of my favorite newer colors from Gina K today. So I applied that kind of lighter towards the tip, a little bit heavier towards the inside of the petals, but really not taking much time to blend. All right, so now we can line up the second stencil, and that's very easy to line up. You just look right through it and it lines up with the inking you've already done, and I'll tape that in place. I'm using the exact same ink pad, but I'm going heavier handed, as heavy as I can. And this will give us a light and a dark effect, but using one ink pad. If you have 2 ink pads, one lighter and one darker, you could do that. But no, you don't need multiple inks to get that light and dark look. All right, now for the third stencil, which does the center portion, I'm going to layer some colors here. I first put down Sweet Corn, which is one of the best soft yellows ever. I love this color. And then I'm putting a little bit of Tangerine twist around the edges. So I knock off some of the excess ink onto the inside of my ink lid so that I don't have too much. This is a darker orange, I want it light. And I just put that around the outside edge. Then I'm coming in with a gold metallic ink and putting that on top, mostly on the outside edge, and this just gives it a warm glow. It's hard to see the shimmer in real life or in the video, but in real life it has this beautiful shimmery glow. And I love that for the center of this flower. All right, next I'm coming in with one of the circle images here. There are a few different options, as I had mentioned, but I'm going with the one that has the smallest little dots. I'll tape that in place, and I'm using a smaller blending brush and warm cocoa ink. Since I don't need to put as much ink down because these are smaller openings, I switched to a smaller brush, but again, use whatever you have. So our first image is done, and I'm taking apart all of those pieces. So removing that temporary tape. I highly recommend Easy C tape, the tape that I'm using here, because it's thin, it doesn't tear paper, holds nicely, and you can reuse the pieces. It's great for die cutting too. It is by far my favorite of temporary tapes. You'll see me use a wider tape later for masking, and I'll talk about that as we go. All right, so this is how we just inked. What I'm going to do is take the bottom two pieces and rotate them, and then the top two pieces and rotate them. So now the parts of our flower on the outside corners and the center there where all four pieces meet is blank white. So I'll flip this over and put tape on the back of them. So I'm taping them back together now with the open white space at the center. So I'll flip that over, use those same pieces of tape again. I reuse those many times. And you can see we have a new place to create a flower there at the center. So I will follow the exact same process. Now this is Altenew Satin masking tape. This is a great tape for masking, holding things down. If you're afraid it has too much stick, you can stick it to your arm first, and that will kind of remove some of the stick, or to your jeans or pajama pants if you're me. And that is a wider tape. And I needed that because you'll notice the openings of the flowers on these stencils kind of go up right to the edge, and I don't want to get ink over the edge. So in that case, I used the wider tape. I'm going through this flower very quickly because it's the exact same thing I just did, and I want to be able to show you more examples later on. So here at the center, I did the yellow, the orange, and the gold, and now we're doing the brown dots on top. And you can see this flower turns out just like the other, and we can again remove the tape from the back and separate the four pieces. If you wanted to, you could stop here and you have four backgrounds. You could add some leaves around it, a sentiment, totally up to you, but I'm going to fill in those other corners. So let's rearrange to how we just were, and then we're going to swap some pieces. So I'm going to take these two and move them up to the top. And now look, we have a new opening there in the center where we can add a flower. So again, I'll put tape on the back to tape those all together to connect them there right in the middle where the 4 points touch. Now you'll notice that those flowers on the side, the center side, it comes in pretty far, and we're going to overlap with whatever flower we add there. So I need to do some masking. I'm using Gina K Masking Magic. Highly recommend this. If you have not used this, it is by far the best masking paper. Now I only need to do masking with the 3 edge petals of the flower. So I just very quickly ink those onto my masking magic. Doesn't matter how this looks, we just need to be able to cut these 3 petals out. I did this on the edge of our masking piece so that I could save the rest of that masking magic for another project. So here I'm just cutting those out. Here's the thing, you don't have to cut it perfect. It's okay if it overlaps or there's a white gap. Nobody will notice. So I'm cutting them out the best I can. So now I have 2 masks with those 3 petals. So there you can see how this first stencil, notice how it's going to overlap with the flowers we've already done on the left and the right there. It's okay if you just leave it to overlap. It'll still look great, but I decided to do the masking. So I'm placing those 3 petal masks over both of those flowers on the left and the right. Now when I ink over this flower we're going to do at the center, it won't overlap with the pink. All right, so let's place that large stencil in the center, again, lining up the top and the bottom petal with the lines that we cut, and the left and the right petal with the lines we cut in that direction. Now this time I'm using Turquoise Sea instead of the Carnation color, but I'm doing the same thing. I do a light amount of ink over the first stencil, then a heavier amount of ink over the second stencil. So I'm putting this on as heavy as I can with this particular color. Use more than one color if you prefer. And for the center again, I layered sweet corn with a bit of tangerine twist and some metallic gold. That's a good reminder. If you can't find the right color in your stash, try layering different colors together. And then finally, a bit of warm cocoa over the dot pattern. And remember, over these stencils, you could do like a gold glitter glitz, like over those little dots. You could do lots of different inking techniques. I'm just going with basic ink. So now I can remove those masks and then, of course, take the 4 pieces apart. Now you could stop here and just have the 3 flowers in the 3 corners, but I am arranging it so that the empty corners touch there at the middle and taping them together. It'd be fun to do a different flower in each corner or different color flowered. So many different ways you can do this technique, and it doesn't have to be a flower. It could be many things, and I'll show you that with my next example. Okay, so now finally put those masks down over those two pink flowers on the left and the right, and we will stencil a blue flower right there at the center. I'm going to skip through this because it's the same thing we've done many times, but I'm again using the Turquoise Sea ink for that flower. So now check this out. When we take this apart, we have 4 pieces that have the flowers in each corner. All we need to do is add a sentiment to them. In fact, I like doing this so much off screen, I created some more panels, same way, but that time I used dark lilac ink and medium orchid ink, which are also from Gina K. And that's what gets you the colors on the bottom there. Now I'm going to do some techniques to these to change them up so they're all different, but we're going to do that a little bit later in the video. First, I wanted to demonstrate this technique using a large symmetrical floral image to show you that this works with a variety of stencils or stamps. This is the Gina K Designs Summer Bouquet Layering Set. I've used this in a video before. I'll link to it up here on the top right. Now I am starting out just like we did last time. I have the 4 pieces here that are 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and I'm taping them together so all the corners meet there right in the center. These pieces are not overlapping, they're just butt up against each other as best as I can do. All right, now this stencil doesn't really have a center, so I'm just eyeballing it, and I am putting little pencil marks around the corner of the first layer once I have it where I want it to be. This will allow me to very easily line up the second and third stencils. So this one I will tape down and I will put green ink over it. You could do a variety of green inks. You could do some fun blending tricks here. I just kept it simple and did a light amount of key lime ink from Gina K Designs. Nothing fancy at all. I wanted these backgrounds to be a bit softer. Now I'm coming in with the second stencil, taped it in place, and I just used those pencil marks to line it up. And I used a light lilac ink. I did a quick blend of that color with a big brush, and then I came in with the smaller brush and added a little darker amount of that ink or heavier amount of that ink at the base of the petals. Now it's time for stencil number 3, and I'm applying light orchid ink to the little flower buds. There are also little dot openings on the stencil, and over that I will use sweet corn for a bit of yellow. So by using a smaller blending brush here, I was able to do selective inking with multiple colors, but you could also do masking if you have a bigger blending brush. All right, so there we have our quick application for the first flower bundle. We can now use a pencil to erase those lines that we made and take our background pieces apart. Now this time I kept the top 2 pieces and the bottom 2 pieces connected, and I just shifted the position so that our stenciling is at the top and the bottom and the blank space is there in the middle. Whatever way makes sense to you, taking them apart, leaving part of them together, just so that you end up with that extra blank space in the middle to do more stenciling. So I'm starting with that first stencil, totally eyeballing it, not trying to center it or do anything, just putting that stencil down. And I will ink it up in the same way I did before. Key lime for the first stencil, then light lilac for the second stencil, and orchid and sweet corn for the third, each time lining up with the pencil marks that I created. Now you'll notice there are some gaps between these floral images that we've stenciled. It's okay. It'll all work out in the end. All right, so I took them apart, and now I'm taping the sides together so that we have that empty space right there in the center. Really, it doesn't matter how you arrange them as long as you end up with that empty space in the middle to add your inking. So this time I could do a stencil right here in the middle, and it'll overlap with the stenciling on the left and the right, or I can move the stencils up and down. So I decided to move them up and down. So I'm going to first ink up here with the stencils. There might be some overlapping, but that's okay. I'm not going to bother with masking this time. And I'm putting little pencil marks to make sure that I know where I put the stencil for the next one that we add. So key lime over the first one, line up the second stencil with those pencil marks. We're doing the lilac color over this one. And then for the third one, we'll do the orchid and the sweet corn. So last time I made it so the flower was in the 4 corners. This time I did some corners, and now I'm doing kind of the center area. So really you can play around with your stencils and figure out what works best with whatever particular stencil you have. I think this works great if you have any kind of stencil that isn't like a repeating pattern. If you want to do like a repeating pattern square stencil, you might need to get a little more creative with the overlap, but it could also work well too. Also know you can use like a large flower image. I know Gina has a lot of really large flowers, like a large daisy. That would be really cool in the corners. Also, you would just have to use a large acrylic block. All right, so now I've repeated this with the stencil on the bottom portion, did the inking the same, and now we have these 4 pieces created. And this is a little bit of a different look. It's not just that repeating flower in the 4 corners. And this just looks like you did each one individually, but you saved time by doing them together. Great 4 for 1 technique, 4 cards for 1 technique. All right, so now that I have all of these panels, let's create some cards. And I'm going to try to do each card a little bit different, just showing you different ways you can step these backgrounds up or keep them simple. So I'll start out by just kind of jumping around, showing you different cards, and then I'll finish up with the simpler ones. Let's start with one of these floral backgrounds, and we'll add some texture to it using an embossing folder. I'm using the Gina K Swiss Dots embossing folder. I use this one a lot. It's definitely a favorite of mine and works on a variety of cards. I thought using an embossing folder with a repeating pattern would be really fun over this background. So I'm running it through my die cut machine, just following my die cut machine's instructions for using a regular embossing folder. And now we have this dot pattern over the entire background and our flowers. Such a fun way to kind of step it up. For a sentiment, I'm using the new Gina K Designs Hello and Shadow dies. So this has the word hello and the shadow. I believe these used to be part of a bundle or kit, but now you can buy them separately, and I use them a lot. So I die cut hello twice from white cardstock and once from gold matte cardstock, and glued those together for stack dimension and added it right to the center of our card panel. I glued the card panel onto a top folding 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. And then I gold heat embossed my friend on a white cardstock strip and added it below the hello sentiment. So this card was very quick to finish thanks to having these backgrounds done using that 4 for 1 technique. I like the look of using that embossing folder to add texture, so I did 2 more this way. But this time I used the Gina K Designs Lattice embossing folder. On this one, I used the embossing folder upside down, so the lines are impressed instead of sticking up, and it just gives a really cool look. I added that onto a white note card and then added the You're So Sweet sentiment, and I'll show you what stamp set that is from in a moment. Very simple design, but that texture and bold color really stands out. And then our third one using an embossing folder, this one I used it the correct way so that the lines are raised. And I added another sentiment to the center there using the coordinating die to cut it out. This time I trimmed the background down and added it to a note card so that there's a little white trim on the outside edge. So this sentiment that says you're an awesome friend and the last one that said you are so sweet is from this new bundle from Gina K Designs that I love so much and I'll be using quite often. It's called You Give Me Butterflies. It's a 6x8 stamp set, stencils, and coordinating dies. There are dies to cut out the butterfly and flower, but I'm most excited that there are dies to cut out those sentiments. So I'll be using these sentiments throughout this video. There's also a handmade with a heart stamp that I'll be using on all of today's envelopes. So you'll be seeing that on all of my colored envelopes today. And by the way, these flower stencils will be really fun to use on their own. You could use those to create a border with this technique, so you end up with 4 panels with flowers around the border. All right, let's move on to another idea, a very simple one, but a great way to kind of step up this background, and that is to stamp on it. I have my MISTI stamping tool and a Brutus Monroe stick and stamp mat inside. That's a little sticky, so it'll help with holding my paper in place. I have a Simon Says Stamp Friendship Text background stamp, and I'm lining up my panel on it to make sure it's straight. I will close my MISTI upside down, and that sticky mat will grab that cardstock panel and keep it in place nice and straight. I'm stamping over this with Gina K Designs Whisper Amalgam ink. This is a nice, warm, soft gray ink that is great for stamping on top of things because it's so light. I really like that because it adds a little bit of interest without being too distracting. Very simple technique here. I think I had a little blue ink still on my background stamp, so it's tinted a little blue, but you get the idea. I used that Hello die, and I cut it twice from white cardstock and once from black glossy cardstock, glued those together and added it to the center, and then stamped You're Amazing right underneath it. Now this particular card, you could leave that You're Amazing off and then stamp any small sentiment you may need when an occasion pops up. So like you could do hello, miss you, hello, birthday wishes. So this is one that you could save for any occasion. Okay, next up we have the technique of adding simple score lines to create a frame on your background. So I've flipped over one of my floral panels and I am doing score lines using my Altenew scoreboard. And I'm doing score lines a 1/2 inch in from each side of the panel. I like to do the score lines from the back so that when I flip it over, the lines are raised. Now I'm using this tiny little stylus tip that comes with the Altenew scoreboard, and it works really well. After I did a score line a 1/2 inch in from the edge, I did 2 more score lines, just 1 line over in the scoreboard. So I ended up with 3 lines close together. These lines end up subtle in my photos, but in real life you can definitely see and feel them. And I've done a complete video on lots of things you can do with the scoreboard, and I will link to that up here on the top right at the end of this video and in my description below. For a sentiment on this, I used the Gina K Designs Caring Flowers stamp set. It's a favorite of mine that I've used many times, and I chose a sentiment from here to stamp right in the center of my card panel. Now I wanted to show you a trick that I like to do for getting that sentiment centered, and I've shown many tricks in videos. This is just another. I'm hoping something may click and be helpful for you. I have my MISTI stamping tool, and inside of it I have placed my Waffle Flower grip mat instead of the mouse pad that usually I have in my stamping tool. The grip mat keeps our paper from moving around. Next I have a Simon Says Stamp A2 placement guide. Now this is a clear heavyweight grid that has the center point marked, which makes it very helpful to placing your sentiment right in the center. I then close the door, grab the stamp, and now I know that stamp is centered. Just to be careful, I will test stamp this. I'll ink up my stamp it onto that clear grid. If I like the results, then I can stamp it onto my card panel and then just clean off that clear grid. Now you could use anything clear for this, but that grid is really special because it has that center point very clearly marked, and I will use it more in future videos. All right, so here's our completed card. I added that panel onto a top folding white note card, and that's it. I didn't add anything else to this. Something about the simplicity of it, those score lines that add some texture, and the bold color, I just wanted to leave it as is. And that sentiment I think is just lovely. Okay, for my next card, I popped up the sentiment in the center and I added some little bees around it. Now for the circle there with the faux stitching, I used the Gina K Designs Master Layouts 5 die set. There are circle dies in here. One has faux stitching on the inside edge, and then one of the others is solid but very slightly bigger. That's going to allow us to do a really cool technique I'll show you later. But on this particular card, I'm just using that circle with the faux stitching on the inside edge. I use that circle die to cut 3 times from white cardstock, and on the top one I stamped a sentiment from the Flowers and Wings stamp set that you see there on the top left. There is a stamp set and a coordinating die set available for it. Now I'm gluing our panel onto a white note card, and then I will glue our sentiment circle right there in the center. By layering additional circles behind it, it's popped up and stands out nicely. Off screen, I created 3 bees using that stamp set and coordinating dies. I used sweet corn ink for the yellow, black, and then that amalgam Whisper light gray ink for the wings. Now to make the wings sparkle a little, I also colored over that ink using a glitter pen, and that adds a lot of sparkle to it. I added those 3 little bees around that center point, and we have our completed card. Now, if you look closely, you can see the shimmer on those wings. It's hard to capture in the video, but it really shimmers a lot in real life, a lot of glitter, and it doesn't rub off. Now, this reminds you that you can use this 4-for-1 card technique to make backgrounds, where you add whatever you want on top. Most of my cards keep those backgrounds kind of as a focal point, but you can change things up. All right, let's move on to another idea. This time I popped up part of the center to create a focal point, but notice that fine purple matte around that center rectangle. This is something I really like about Gina K Design's master layouts. This is her newest one. It's number 13. And you'll see there are rectangle dies. The smaller one has faux stitching on the inside edge. And then the second one is only slightly bigger so that you can create a very thin matte, which I'm crazy about. On that last Master Layouts die set, number 5, the circles were this way. On this one, there's rectangles. So I'm using the smaller rectangle with the faux stitching and cutting that right from the center of one of our backgrounds. If you want to make sure it's straight and even in the center, you can use a T-roller to check it. You can see my T-roller is right there because I checked mine off screen. Now on the back of that die cut rectangle that we just cut from our background, I am gluing a purple rectangle that I created with the slightly larger die. And look at that perfect light purple matte we have around it. It's very thin. It looks amazing. Then behind that, I'm gluing 3 additional rectangles that I created from some scrap cardstock, and that will just give it dimension. So I'm gluing these 3 rectangles behind the purple one, and then we'll put that all together on our card. Now, I know there are rectangle die sets out there of varying sizes, but the advantage of these is those 2 rectangle dies are very close in size, so you get a very fine matte, which I think just looks so classy. Now, I did trim the outside edges of my panel down a tiny bit so that I could put that onto an A2 note card, and a little purple shows around the edge. Then we can glue our stacked rectangle right in the center, and it'll stand up nicely. Notice that that pattern is still continuous across the entire background, but now the center is raised, creating a nice focal point. I die cut the hello from a dark purple cardstock and added some Tonic Aqua Shimmer pen to it so it has a bit of sparkle, and then stamped my friend underneath it with dark lilac ink. For accents, I added some butterflies that I created using a Birch press die set, and I just scattered those on the background. Here's another that I made with the similar technique. I did the same 2 rectangle dies, but the one that's slightly larger I cut from gold matte cardstock, so you have that thin gold trim around it. I used the You Give Me Butterflies bundle to stamp Yours So Sweet. Kept this one very simple. This is one you could again just leave the sentiment off of it entirely and then add any sentiment you need for a particular occasion. Here is another card where I use that same technique where you pop up some of the center and then do a little frame around it. This time I used the Master Layouts 10 die set from Gina K. It has these 2 frame dies. The smaller one has the faux stitching, and then the slightly larger one cuts a nice mat for it. So once again, I used the smaller one to cut right from the center of our background. I will use that same die and cut 3 more from some scrap cardstock. So here's a piece of cardstock with the background technique that I showed you today where I messed up. Instead of letting that go to waste, I keep all my pieces like that, and I cut from them for these stacking pieces when I add dimension. And when I cut from the cleaner side so that there isn't a chance of that color showing on the edges. And I find that really works, and it saves money over buying foam tape, and it's a great way to put your what normally would be waste to good use. So I glue those scrap die cuts together and then glue on the top of that our pretty die cut that we cut from our background. I will also use the slightly larger frame die to cut from white cardstock, and I'll glue my stacked ones on that so you can see there is that white frame sticking out the back. Now we can add all of this onto a white note card that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And I did first trim my background down a little bit so there would be that white trim showing around the edge. I'll put glue right there at the center, and then I will line up my frame popped up piece right there with the pattern on the background. For sentiment, I'm using the Gina K Designs Dogwood stamp set. Lots of great sentiments on here along with the beautiful images, but I stuck with the sentiments today. I thought I'd again show you that technique of using my grip mat inside of my MISTI stamping tool and then the grid mat on top of that from Simon Says Stamp. Now it does come with a solid one if you want to have that behind it so it's easier to see, but I'm just using the clear one. I put my card in the corner, place that clear grid on top, and you can see the focal point right there in the center is very easy to figure out, super easy. And those little plus signs make it even easier to center up your image inside of it. So I lined up my sentiment there in the center. I'm going to test this out first. Before I stamp it on my card, I will leave that grid on top and stamp right on top of it. If it looks like it's going to be nice on my card, if I'm happy with how straight it is and how centered it is, I can take that grid off and stamp it directly on my card, and I know we'll get good results. And we can easily wipe that ink off of the clear grid mat. Now that clear grid piece, there are many out there like this, but this one I really like because it's very thick and it's got those focal points really marked well. All right, here is the completed card. I kept it very simple. You could add embellishments or other stamped images if you wanted to. But again, I wanted to really focus on those beautiful flowers in the corners. All right, next up we have a card that uses those circle dies that I showed you earlier from the Master Layouts 5 set. And this was really to cover up a mistake. So I had stamped this greeting directly onto the background to show you could make one layer cards, but I didn't stamp it with the help of that grid. I tried to eyeball it and I got it a little crooked. Now I could have left it as is, but I like to do things the best I can. So I decided to cover it up. So I stamped another sentiment on a white cardstock circle and then used silver cardstock for the slightly bigger circle behind it. And then I added my background onto a silver note card. So I used silver cardstock for that. Silver cardstock has white core. So when you open it up, it's white on the inside, but the note card itself is silver. This next example also uses those circle dies, but I did that technique where I popped up part of the background, so it's still continuous even though there's that raised dimension on the circle. I used silver for the mat of the circle and added this all to a purple note card, and that sentiment is from the You Give Me Butterflies bundle I showed you earlier. And last but not least, this one I kept very simple. I trimmed it down and added it to a purple note card, used the Hello die with purple cardstock and a bit of shimmer on top, and then stamped My Friend underneath it. Didn't bother adding anything else to it because I really like that soft background. So in the end, I have 12 cards here because I did the 4-for-1 technique 3 times. So here are the 4 that I created using the Carnation and Turquoise Sea inks. You can see all 3 have little differences between them, making them each special on their own. Then we have the 4 cards that we created with the Orchid and Lilac inks. These are very simple, but I like those bold colors. And then finally the 4 we created with the non-symmetrical layering stencils, creating very soft backgrounds that you can add anything to. So there you have a 4-for-1 card design. I will link below to the products I used. I will also link to the videos that I mentioned, and at the end here, I'll link to a couple other related videos. Most of them are 2-for-1, but you could change things up to be 4-for-1. Thank you for spending this time with me. Please hit subscribe if you don't mind doing so and you want to see more videos. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.